Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I worked at a Boy Scout summer camp a few months back, and I had what I would call the point in my life where I decided I'm not cut out for experiencing spoopy things. Be first-year staff. The camp is right in the heart of a Native American sacred area. The resident tribe actually blessed the camp when it was first opened. Learning all about camp traditions and different ghost stories they have in the area. One strikes me as more interesting than the others. Shadowy figures called dark watchers that watch you from a distance and disappear when you notice them or stare you down. Became decent friends with many of the other veteran staff members. Asked them to tell more stories about the Dark Watchers. A surprising amount of them have personal experiences. Probably at least 80% of the second-year plus staff have experienced it. Stories of waking up in their tents to see an 8 feet tall shadow standing over them, staring them down. Stories of shadows and footsteps being noticed outside of tents when people are camping alone. One story of a guy who came out of one of the shower houses there to be confronted by 3 just staring at him from above the stall. Being a spoopy addict and loving the nature of ghost stories, I get excited about all of these stories. Secretly hope that I get to experience it as well so that I have my own accounts of them rather than just telling stories. Quick note to set up the rest of the events. One of the merit badges I was teaching required the kids to do an overnight camp out in a shelter that they built themselves, so every week I would take the new class out to the edges of the camp and tell them to construct their shelter before going to sleep. After a few weeks of this, I got pretty used to that campsite and started to memorize its layout. Go for almost a month without a single incident. I periodically ask other staff about their stories and some of the other legends. Gathered enough stories to fill an entire thread. Gets to the last 2 days that I'm at that camp before the season is over. Take the last group out to the campsite, nothing special. Rest of the night goes without incident until I wake up around 4 a.m. to go to the bathroom. I go a little ways down a path where I know where none of the scouts have built their shelter so I don't accidentally piss all over them. Go about doing my business when suddenly I feel like my heart is just sinking farther and farther into my body. It feels like every single tree in the forest is watching me, judging. What were just trees during the whole month suddenly feel like pairs of eyes staring down at me. I've been out there enough to know that this isn't what it normally feels like. I finish up and start taking the trail back only to notice that some of the trees near the clearing look odd. Normally there are some small, barren trees that are just branches attached to a trunk all around the clearing. I'm looking at them when I notice that I can't see past them in the moonlight. It's as if there were shadows of leaves on the trees blocking my vision, making it impossible to see past the trees. I know for a fact that all of the leaves have fallen off of the trees in the area. Get closer to one of the trees because it is near where I have my shelter set up. A massive shadow suddenly breaks out from behind the tree and takes a few steps before disappearing. The after image of a man in the middle of a running motion is burned in my mind when suddenly the other trees start to behave similarly. It feels like every tree is hiding something behind it, and whether it is or not I start to panic. Little bitch mode.x kicks into gear, crawl into my shelter and toss my sleeping bag over my head and pretend that I don't feel like the forest is watching me. The feeling keeps getting worse and worse before I start to hear footsteps. Not normal footsteps with a rhythm or pacing. Sounds like someone is just stomping into the dead leaves and branches in a way that would make noise, but not be overly obvious. The pacing is what really got to me. It didn't feel like they were footsteps at first. It would sound like a solitary stomp, then silence for 5 or 6 seconds before another strike. They keep getting closer and closer. It feels how I imagine a stray cat feels when it knows someone is there, but they are inching closer and closer, trying to get close enough to pet it or something. It finally reaches a few yards behind my head when it comes to a stop. I'm lying on my back in the dirt, locked in place wanting to breathe a sigh of relief, but that anxious feeling hasn't gone away yet. The footsteps come back, but they are very far away and they are coming from the opposite side that they were. They sound like they are circling my position when I start to hear more and more steps coming in and leaving. They keep getting closer and closer before disappearing completely and starting up somewhere else. This goes on for about 30 minutes, the entire time I'm paralyzed with fear. At its peak I counted about 5 sources of this sound before the adrenaline finally got me. Uninstall littlebitchmode.x. I snap up off of the ground and take the sleeping bag off of me and start to look around the dark of night. Dead silent. No footsteps, no bugs making noise, no wind. Heck, I don't even know if I could hear my own breathing. I stay sitting up like this surveying the area for about 5 minutes before laying back down, hesitantly. Fucking starts up again at full force. The trees hate me again and I feel the pit of my stomach turning inside out. Reinstall littlebitchmode.x. Stay awake for another hour or so before it dies out and I get some sleep. The paranoia hit me pretty hard early on that morning, but as I started to wake up more I felt more and more rational. I figured it must have been one of the scouts playing a prank or moving around to go to the bathroom, so I gathered everyone up and took attendance as we got ready to go back to the main camp. I asked everyone if anybody was up last night around 4 a.m. and a little less than a third of my class said that they were. I felt somewhat relieved by that, so I went ahead and asked if any of them were walking about at that time or had to go to the bathroom. Not a single fucking hand was raised. I asked about it and nearly every single kid who was up at that time said that they were too afraid of moving. They said it felt like they were being watched. Worse than that though, every single one of the kids who were up said that they heard footsteps all around the camp and they would peek out of their shelter and see nothing. We earned our NOPE badges getting out of there that morning, and other than that, the last few days of camp went without a hitch, though I don't have half as much enthusiasm about experiencing spookiness as I once did. I got a few other stories about that area, but they are all secondhand, so I don't have their details as well memorized. The camp is at the base of a mountain that many Native American tribes consider the origin of all life. Following the mountain range a little ways back is a rock formation that looks like a notch that, according to legend, used to have a section over the top that made the whole thing look like a window. Called the window, it is said to be the gateway to the spirit world and that many spirits pass through it on their way to and from the spirit world. Probably the most infamous area that I was interested in was an outpost camp to a place called Fox Camp. Many of the spoopy tales I was told about came from there, usually involving a thing called drum rock. What set Fox Camp, and another area called Fish Camp, apart from the main scout camp was the fact that they were outside of the original camp land area, meaning they were not blessed by the tribe when the camp was opened. Anyways, all manner of terrifying experiences came from this area. People having shared dreams of Native American rituals, shared dreams of a female shaman with a mask staring over you while you sleep, freezing cold air turning into a blistering heat in the middle of the night. The list goes on. Anyways, drum rock gets its name from the low percussive sounds that emanate from a massive rock set near a large stone wall that oversees it. People who camp in the area will start to hear what sounds like a Native American hide drum being hit in a slow, steady rhythm. One of the stories that one of the veterans told me was about a camp out he went on with his girlfriend and some of his friends. In the middle of the night they all woke up at the same with that anxious feeling I was talking about earlier. They were camping near a stream that time, but they didn't hear the stream running at all the entire time they had that feeling of unease. They started to hear this hollow beat that shook them coming from the rock. It went on for a while before the drumming started growing in pitch and frequency. Almost all at once, the drumming started to reach a crescendo and the stagnant air around them changed. The winds started to blow once in each direction, north, west, east, south, before dying out completely. After that, the sounds of the stream came back and a gentle passing air returned. The next morning, they were talking about it and one of them had asked if they had had any weird dreams. Every single one of them had dreamed that there was a bonfire raging and hundreds of shadowy figures were dancing around it, chanting while the heat of the fire made them sweat. Another instance with drum rock actually occurred while I was working at the camp. I had gone home for the weekend because I needed to get some laundry done, but a bunch of the other staff had chosen to stay and do an overnight trip to Fox Camp. When I had got back to camp, they seemed really shook up and didn't seem like they had gotten much sleep. It turns out, one of them had stopped breathing in their sleep and started gasping and choking in the middle of the night. They woke him up and asked him what was wrong, and all he could recall is that he was having a dream that a dark figure was standing over him choking him. Everyone kind of got the feeling that something was wrong and went to sleep feeling uneasy except for one guy who stayed up all night to tend the fire. When asked about it, he said that he couldn't try to sleep without hearing whispers. They had to pack up early and get back to camp by morning because a new group of scouts were coming in. The guy who was choking the night before was still asleep when everyone started packing up, but he was tossing and turning and speaking frantically about nothing. They said it sounded like he was arguing in his sleep, but it was just gibberish coming out. When they went to douse the fire, he started screaming, "No," in his sleep before waking up. After everyone comforted him and asked what that was about, he said he couldn't remember, but he felt strongly about the fire staying up for a little bit longer. They agreed to let the fire burn a little bit longer before he finally said that he felt better. After fully packing up, they started to make their way back to the main camp when the drumming started up kind of dully, like it was in the distance just saying its goodbyes. After they finished telling me that, I had to admit that I was a little jealous. All I did that weekend was laundry. My story about my overnight camp out happened later that week. Most of the stories that I was told about at camp related to personal experiences with the Dark Watchers and drum rock, but there was one in particular that I feel could stand its own as a horror story or a creepypasta without all of the background knowledge. Put frankly, there were many things that the staff were told that we were not allowed to tell the scouts because it would frighten them. The Dark Watchers, the albinos, drum rock, the kabuki man, etc. However, one stood aside from the other stories as it never felt like a spoopy story at first. You always had to ask one of the staff members who knew it multiple times because most didn't want to think about it. One of the rules we had for going on hikes or overnight campouts outside of the main camp area was one that seemed kind of odd at first. Do not leave your camera in an accessible location in your bag. When I was told about this rule, I started asking about it, and it wasn't until the last week that there was enough free time for the staff member to actually tell me the story behind it. There was a woman who had went out hiking alone in the wilderness surrounding the area. She kept her GPS, flare gun, and camera near her at all times because she knew the dangers of hiking alone in bear and mountain lion country. Anyways, she had been planning a 5-day hike that would take her across many of the scenic landmarks that were near the area. Overall, she had a good time and ran into no trouble throughout the entire trip. Whenever night rolled around, she would set up her tent and go to sleep. The whole trip was considered a success, and she immediately went to a shop to get her disposable camera's photos developed. Looking over her photos, she started to notice that there were pictures taken during the times that were in between the time she went to sleep and woke up. Multiple photos were taken of the outside of her tent, her campground, local wildlife at night, pictures of her tent zipper opened, and worst of all, pictures of her sleeping. I figured it was an actual spooky story made up to scare hikers and campers, but the amount of seriousness and unease the staff member had worried me. I got to know the guy over that month, and he wasn't one to joke around. He was an older gentleman with a big old mountain man beard. He even showed me some pictures that he insists he never took. They weren't anything major or creepy like pictures of him sleeping, just pictures of the ground at night with the flash going off. Pictures of the trees but upside down or tilted. The whole thing pretty much guaranteed that I would never bring a camera to that camp so long as I live.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.